So I do, like I mentioned before, I want to give a special shout out to the Athletic and specifically Pablo Maurer and Sam Stejskal for their reproduction of the 25 MLS scandals, pranks, and improprieties story, where this story comes from. Now, I've beefed it up a little bit and kind of given some background and some story behind it with some storytelling narrative that I'm just, naturally known for. But right now, the year's 2007, New England Revolution are in top form yet again. Taylor Twellman's bagging goals, Matt Reese, Michael Parkhurst locking down the back. Young stars like Jeff Lorenowitz are starting to emerge. And they just actually shipped off a decent young striker. Some of you may know the name Clint Dempsey to test his luck overseas. They were looking to rebound from the heartbreak of MLS Cup Final 2006, losing to the Houston Dynamo in penalty kicks. They were determined to right the wrongs of 2006, winning everything in their path. MLS Cup, US Open Cup, Supporters Shield, everything. Along the way, an icon of sorts was discovered in the form of a giant bunny. More on that later. But did it help them achieve their goals? That's the question. The story is the answer. This story is strictly about the celebrations after a US Open Cup victory. So for anybody who thinks that the players don't care about the US Open Cup, this story may change your mind. But before we even do that, let's go and chat about how they got to the final in the first place. In the 2007 iteration of the US Open Cup, and this may shock some people, only 8 teams actually entered that competition from MLS, and it still survived. Crazy, I know. New England, along with 7 other MLS sides, entered the round of 32. I believe it was a third round, and were drawn with a belter of a first, round matchup for them in the Rochester Raging Rhinos of the USL. This great side from upstate New York fought mightily, but the New England Revolution dispensed them 4-2 to move on into the Cup, thanks to a brace by Steve Ralston and another brace by Taylor Twellman. Next, they would face up with another USL side, the Harrisburg City Islanders. Early goals from Andy Dorman and Taylor Twellman once again would ensure a 2-1 quarterfinal win and a semifinals date with yet another USL side, the Carolina Railhawks. Yes, a very difficult path to the final, some may say. However, this was a more difficult test than the others and saw Jeff Lorenowitz and Anthony Mayer traded goals to get the game to extra time, where Pat Noonan would score early on in the first period to win the game and get to the finals against their first MLS opponent, FC Dallas. And what a final it was. Now, as great as this game was, it is not the focus of the story, and we may actually need to add it because it was such a good game. However, I will just give the brief highlights where Pat Noonan and Arturo Alvarez traded goals before Twellman gave New England the lead just before halftime. Coming out of the break, Wells Thompson got a goal of his own to double the lead. And then FC Dallas would get one back through Abe Thompson, no relation. But New England would see the match out and get things rolling. And by things, I mean celebrations. After the game, it was party time. New England won a trophy after an agonizing MLS Cup final defeat last season, and they were ready to celebrate. From the article, from a beer-soaked locker room to a series of strip clubs, they traveled around the towns like the kings of American soccer they were. So much so that a player on the team ended up spending half of the league's minimum salary on drinks and entertainment for that night alone. That's $13,000 for anybody wondering. That was all before they even moved back to the hotel. Now, a reminder, this game took place on October 3rd.
On October 3rd, he asked me what day it was.
It's October 3rd.
And anyone who's been around a hotel near the holidays knows that those places start to set up for the holidays relatively early. And this hotel was no different. However, what they did do differently was leave the closet with all of the decorations in it open. Most people listening can probably do the math. At the end of the night, the Revs bus, full of drunken US Open Cup champions, had one extra figure on it in the form of a $1,000 5-foot-tall Easter bunny. Not only was it brought back, it was brought everywhere, which included the first game after the final of the US Open Cup, which was Chicago Fire away. Now, a quick mention on New England's season up to this point. New England started off hot in their first 10 games, only losing 2 of them. They followed up their next 10 games where they only lost, you guessed it, 2 games. They would then win or draw 5 of their next 7 games. That's 2 losses, in case you're noticing a trend here, before heading into the US Open Cup final against Dallas, where we start putting the pieces together, right? This whole time, New England were chasing DC for the top of the East and the top of the Supporters Shield standings. They were hot but Luciano Emilio and company were hotter. It was coming down to the wire, and any drop points now would be detrimental. The Revs players, high on adrenaline from the US Open Cup title, brought the bunny to Chicago. And not only did they bring it to Chicago, they brought it out to the field when they trained the day prior. They put a training kit on it and left it on the sideline like it was another player. Then they gave it its own locker in the Toyota Park locker room before the game. They dressed it up, sat it down like it was another one of those players. Quite clearly, they weren't switched on as much as you would expect, but no worries, right? New England would end up losing that game 2-1 after going up early through Jeff Lorenowitz. But no worries, right? New England's still third in the Shield race, 5 points back. However, a win would have put them second, just 2 points back. But no worries, right? Like it's just one game, they'll be fine. They would travel back to Gillette Stadium, where they were so dominant that year, to take on the Columbus Crew, who were scrapping for the playoffs as the 5th place team in the East out of 7. Relatively straightforward, it should be, right? So much so that they didn't worry about their extra player on the roster. The bunny was brought back in and was treated just as well as anybody else could have been. He was once again given his very own locker and his very own training top, and it was off to the game. Everybody's feeling a high. Everybody's thinking that they're doing great. This exciting match would end as a 3-2 loss after Guillermo Barros Schelotto would score an 86th-minute winner just minutes after Steve Ralston got them level. A loss dropped them to 4th place in the Shield standing, 6 points back. If you think about it, a win here, a win last week, and the results that DC had gotten to this point, they would be leading the Supporters' Shield right now. Clear by 2 points. At the end of that game, the Supporters' Shield US Open Cup double was gone. There was no chance they could win the Supporters' Shield. And since the players weren't really superstitious, but they were a little stitious, they thought that the bunny had to go. So they took the bunny out back and they destroyed it where it stood. They beat the crap out of it. They ripped it apart, killed it. Hopefully ridding the demons which haunted the team. Or so they thought. Their last game was against Wooden Spoon winners Toronto FC. A surefire way to pick up some points and get a little bit higher in the standings, right? Or maybe they had their night ruined by a man named Danny Dicchio. I won't spoil it. Yeah, I will. They tied that game 2-2. They picked up 1 point in their last 3 games to lead them to a 4th place finish in the table. When the Supporters' Shield was in reach just 3 games ago. A kick in the gut after such a high from the US Open Cup win. But it's okay because this is MLS and the season doesn't end there. They were second in the Eastern Conference seeding in MLS playoffs, and they were hoping that their luck had turned heading into November since the bunny was dead. And things started off well, where they were able to bribe a bunch of referees to let them beat the New York Rebels in a 2-game series, 1-0, thanks to a Taylor Twellman goal in the second half of the second game. Twellman would bag another goal in the conference finals to beat Chicago and get them to the 2007 MLS Cup finals against none other than last year's opponent, the Houston Dynamo. In this game, the ball got rolling early, and Taylor Twellman scored. At this time, this was the 4th final in 6 years and 3rd final in a row. Twellman scoring as early as he did, no doubtedly, left some hope in New England fans that they may finally be seeing an MLS Cup victory. But at halftime, something changed. Almost as if a spirit came over the Revs, or maybe bunny hopped over them. Joseph Nguyen and Dwayne De Rosario added goals in the 61st and the 74th minute to steal the title from New England and had them their 3rd MLS Cup final loss in a row. Did New England blow it yet again? They did. Did they have anybody to blame but themselves? Maybe. Maybe not. Would the team have finished first in the Supporters' Shield race, rode the wave of success into finally winning their first MLS Cup and one of the first domestic trebles in MLS history? The world may never know. But they say that if you move an ancient artifact from a sacred land, you are cursed forever. Who knows how long that bunny was there? Who it belonged to? What powers it had? Now, until the end of time, we will all be left just to wonder. What if they never moved the bunny?
I don't know. It seems like weak sauce to blame it on the bunny, especially if you didn't go on and if you went on and won the whole thing after destroying the bunny, that's one thing. But they clearly didn't do that. And thank you for spoiling my part of the episode, you bum.